the evening began to cover the mansion of the chairman. At this time, the guests also arrived noisily and crowded in the mansion. The guests included many handsome and beautiful rich people. The party also had a 4-layer chocolate strawberry cake with sweet candy. At this time, the bride and groom were splendid in a sea of roses. On the bride's hand was a diamond ring with a huge diamond. The male lead Do-jun seemed to receive money for advertising banana milk. He saw him holding a box of milk everywhere. Do-jun thought to himself that Jin Young-chun seemed to have feelings for the woman he was engaged to. He learned that the second time they met was a meeting between the two families. Then they met a few times. Do-jun thought it was hard to understand. Did they have feelings because they had a lot of money? At this time, there was a voice of someone who was crazy about handsome men. It turned out to be his sister-in-law who just got engaged. She said to Do-jun, "I heard you are the #1 beauty in Young-chun's family." Do-jun also congratulated them politely. His cousin said, "Thank you, Do-jun. Is this the first time we meet? Let me ask you something." Do-jun bowed quickly and said, "Congratulations, sister-in-law. I'm Do-jun." The sister-in-law also thanked him, the young master Do-jun. At this time, there was a loud voice calling Young-jun. Then the young uncle walked away and left her to tell Do-jun to talk to his sister-in-law and he would be back soon. Do-jun stood there very embarrassed. After greeting, he didn't know what to say. Fortunately, the sister-in-law was friendly and said that young master Do-jun was the ideal model of all the girls, which made Do-jun astonished. The sister-in-law also thanked him politely and said, "You are the ideal model of all girls. You are tall and handsome, and you are also smart and in the top 0.1%. Besides, you are the youngest member of a wealthy family that makes everyone jealous." Do-jun smiled politely and asked, "Is being the youngest a reason to be jealous?" The sister-in-law answered, "Of course, you don't have to inherit the company or do business. You can enjoy life by using your inheritance money." Do-jun scratched his head and thought that it seemed true. He continued, "The problem is that I don't know if there will be any money left when it's my turn." The sister-in-law laughed and said, "Do you need to worry about that? You are the grandson that Chairman Jin loves." Then they fell into silence and didn't know what to say. Do-jun thought that it was natural for her to investigate him since he would become the son-in-law of Sun-yen Group. Then he smiled and said, "What do you mean by the most loved grandson? When the other grandchildren grew up, he gave them some shares and money, but he only gave me a sports car that I don't even have a driver's license for." The sister-in-law pretended to be surprised and asked, "Really? Then doesn't that mean he will give you something bigger later? I heard you are an exemplary student and hardly spend money." Do-jun denied it and said that he didn't spend anything because he didn't have any money to spend. If he did, he would use a lot of it, he said while holding a glass of wine. Then he thought that if she knew how much money he had spent, she wouldn't stand like this. The sister-in-law said again, "Are you sick? Why don't I take care of your pocket money later and I will also talk to Young-jun." Do-jun quickly thanked her and said, "Really? Thank you very much." Then he continued to say politely that he had to perform well with Young in the future. The sister-in-law also pretended to stand there smiling shyly. Then Do-jun made an excuse and said, "Sister-in-law, please wait a moment. I need to go to the bathroom." The sister-in-law smiled brightly like a Korean actress. After that, she started in the direction of Do-jun going to the bathroom like a pervert. She thought that he was not an ordinary person, who went in and out of the stock market every day. How could Do say that he had no money? At this time, her husband turned back and asked how she felt. They both looked like perverts staring at Do-jun. The wife said very politely, making her husband surprised, "Is that all?" Then she continued, "The rich young master doesn't show anything. He is naturally like that, right?" The husband said, "That's right. When he was young, he was always hiding in the house and always exhausted. Anyway, we don't need to be too cautious because I think I will use Do-jun as my right-hand man. The wife heard her husband say that and didn't say anything but just smiled wickedly. Then she quickly pulled her husband's arm closer and said, "That's right. I promised to give him plenty of pocket money, right?" The husband smiled brightly and said, "Of course. It's natural for the elder sister-in-law to give the younger cousin some pocket money." At this time, in the bathroom, Nam Do-jun just stepped in and complained, "How inconvenient." He was about to pull down his pants to go to the bathroom when he heard a voice saying, "Young master." He turned his head and saw the old secretary who came to the bathroom and didn't leave him alone. Do-jun was astonished and asked, "Assistant Kim, I told you to rest today. It's an event in the house so I don't need to go out." But Assistant Kim said seriously, "I don't know if you have time but I have something to tell you." Suddenly the conversation became tense and Do-jun didn't know what had happened, but because he needed to go to the bathroom he said, "If it's the parking lot then my car is there. You go there and I'll come out right away." Then Do-jun also got to go to the bathroom comfortably without being disturbed. As soon as he finished going to the bathroom he thought, "What is it?" His expression was not normal at all. Then Do-jun went outside to look for his car in the parking lot. Because it was a mansion of a rich family it was too big so Do-jun walked for a long time before finding his car. Then he opened the car door and got in and asked, "What is it?" But Secretary Kim said that he should wait a moment and Team Leader Shin would explain. Do-jun doubted and asked again, "Team Leader Shin?" Secretary Kim answered, "Yes, he is the team leader of our strategy team. I mentioned him once before. Do you remember?" At this time Do-jun asked the person who said, "Do you know about the click fraud?" Suddenly someone approached and made Do-jun startled. The man bowed and said, "Hello, I'm Team Leader Shin Shako." Do-jun looked at the man and thought, "I've seen this face somewhere before. Who is he?" Team Leader Shin asked again, "Don't you remember? We met at Jang Fai's villa. My grandfather took you home in the early morning." Hearing this, Do-jun remembered who he was. He remembered that he had saved this person and threw a bait but there was no special reaction so he forgot about it. Team Leader Shin continued, "Because we don't have much time I'll be brief. I don't know if you know but my team is called the Third Generation. When I worked, someone started following the Third Generation team a month ago." Do-jun heard Team Leader Shin say that and was very surprised. They knew everything? Well, they didn't grasp all their movements but only their roots. Do-jun asked if Young Jun was included in that group. Team Leader Shin replied, "Yes, they followed everyone without missing anyone." At that moment, Do-jun thought, why did he check on his own son? That's too much. If it's not him, then who is it? Team Leader Shin continued, "With our manpower, we don't have the ability to identify who is following them. We are not experts who can follow them either. On the contrary, since all the members of the team played the role of secretaries, following someone was too much for them." Do-jun thought. Then he asked, "But why did you tell me this? If you follow the order, then," Team Leader Shin answered, "I know the order. I have to report to the Strategy Department Head and Secretary Department Head Lee Ha-chae first. And then to the intelligence agents or important figures of Sun Yen." Do-jun asked again, "You knew this before, but why?" Team Leader Shin clenched his fist and said, "It's a bit embarrassing, but I want to grab the rope." Do-jun was surprised. "Rope? Is it the rope that I'm thinking of?" Team Leader Shin said, "Yes, our strategy team has no future and no shelter. So it's rare for anyone to endure for a year. Even if they endure for a few years, they can't see the light." Do-jun was confused. "But why me? I'm the youngest and have no voice in the company. How can I become a rope?" At that time, Secretary Kim also wanted to say something, but Team Leader Shin asked him, "So you don't want to reach out to me?" Do-jun calmly said, "Even so, how can I shake hands casually? No one reached out except me." And I'm the only one who became a goat. At that moment, team leader Shin became unusually serious. Or should I look inside? He said, it's the only hand, but because it's reliable, I want to grab it. He shouted, if it's an unreliable hand, I would have ignored it and turned away. Because among Chairman Jin's nephews, no one is more careful than you in managing yourself. You are sincere and never deceive. Assistant Kim sitting in front was shocked by the sudden outburst of the team leader. After saying that, team leader Shin also felt like he went too far. Do-jun was still silent and thinking. He secretly calculated that he could check on his cousin's movements. There was no reason to refuse. The two guards waited as if they were waiting for eternity. Who said waiting is happiness? Although they waited, Do-jun didn't say anything. After a short time, he spoke up. Team leader Shin and assistant Kim, listen to me. The two of them were suddenly named and became serious. They listened to what the kid had to say. Do-jun said, it's not that you grabbed my hand that I reached out first. It's that the strategy team begged me to become their roof and I agreed. Do you understand? The same result but different order. They had to know the difference. Team leader Shin hurriedly answered, yes, of course. But Do-jun said, don't answer so easily. It's not that I reached out and you grabbed it. The difference is huge. Team leader Shin still respectfully said, we know that. It doesn't mean that you can remove the roof that protects us anytime. At this moment, Do-jun thought to himself, have I been too attentive for a long time? Does this guy understand clearly? Team leader Shin spoke respectfully, I will do exactly what you expect, within the limits you set. If I fall behind even a little bit, I will not complain if you cut me off. Do-jun said, I don't mean to ask you two to be loyal to me. It's just a transaction. The strategy team provides what I need and I pay for it. Do-jun looked distant and said, the bright future could be the price, or it could be money. At this point, team leader Shin asked, is it because you are not a member of the Sunyan group yet? Do-jun replied, no, I still don't have much expectation and trust in you two. That's why it's just a transaction. If you want something more from me, show me something that can change me. That's enough. Do-jun recalled, until now, I have never received anyone's loyalty. But I know that nothing is more precious than the loyalty of a foolish and weak lover. Then he called out to assistant Kim, who was terrified. Do-jun said, from tomorrow on, I will take a taxi, so follow those who follow me. Don't rush too much, just take it slow. It doesn't matter if you take a long time. Assistant Kim nodded quickly and said, yes. Then Do-jun started to assign tasks to team leader Shin. He said, from now on, send me the report documents of the strategy team first. If I draw a red line, don't report it to the higher-ups. Team leader Shin was happy to obey the orders of the young boss. Do-jun continued, don't worry about money and don't save on operating costs. If you need personal money, don't hesitate to say it. I won't let anyone worry about money. Hearing Do-jun's offer to support them financially, the two men were moved to tears. Then Do-jun closed his eyes and leaned against the window of the luxury car to rest. He thought that he had gained quite a lot today. He discovered a girl he needed to be wary of and found a replacement for his eyes. The next morning at the Sehun TV tower, news was broadcasted that another suspicion had been raised about Fantasy's intention to buy out Achi Group. Fantasy's source of capital was revealed to be from Japan. It could not rule out the possibility that Akimoto would become a bridge for the Japanese car industry to enter Korea. Sehun watched the news on TV and was furious. He said to Do-jun, at least we should hold a press conference to refute this. This is cyberbullying. If we touch on anti-Japanese sentiment, there is no way out. Do-jun answered, is there any basis for that news? It's not like they are writing a novel. Sehun said again, it's power bank. Power Bank is a listed company and also a company that attracts attention in Japan. So it won't be hard to find out the truth that we invested in it. Dojun asked, is there any point in requesting a correction? But Sehun replied, the results will be out next year. If that happens, then father's acquisition of Achimoto will end. Dojun was angry. He said, if the next reports continue to spread rumors, then we have to send the chairman and the executive directors away. The Union of Action Group also uses it as an excuse. Sehun was shocked. He asked, is that the last resort? But Dojun said, maybe you won't be able to wait until the end. Sehun started to sweat nervously. He thought to himself, the tycoon is scary indeed. I never thought that news would be broadcasted publicly without checking the facts. Dahyun is very skilled in these tactics, isn't he? At the press conference, the reporters competed to take photos of Sehun's clarification. He said, the rumor about the Japanese capital flow is completely false. The truth is that our fantasy invested in Japan, but it was a short-term investment and we withdrew after making a profit. On the contrary, we earned Japanese yen. He said seriously. A reporter asked, but isn't the yen you earned still the capital of the US? Sehun answered, that's why we are pouring the yen into reviving Achimoto right now. But the reporter still asked, it's hard to understand why an investment company that seeks profit would buy a car company that would take a long time to recover its investment and make a profit. The company went bankrupt because of poor management. There is a risk of not being able to recover even a penny of investment. Is the reason you accept this risk because you are a representative of the Japanese car industry? Sehun was angry. He thought, do you think you are the one who makes statements? He shouted into the microphone. Who started talking about the Japanese car industry first? Where did you get that information from? At this point, all the reporters were noisy. They said, do you mean it has nothing to do with it? Can you confirm that again? Dojun was watching from outside. He thought, you are not used to this. Why do you deal with reporters emotionally? Suddenly, a representative spoke up. He said, I know well about the movements of the Japanese car industry because Achimoto had technical cooperation with a Japanese company. I can confirm firmly that Japan has nothing to do with this acquisition. The reporters were still very noisy. He asked for permission to ask a question to the chairman. He saw them appear together in this position and said, can we say that you supported Fantasy's acquisition of Action Group? Chairman Zhang calmly answered, that's right. Not only me, but all the staff and employees of Action Group support it. The entire Union of Action Group promised to freeze their salaries and not have any disputes until they achieve a surplus in case Fantasy takes over. He declared that it was the resolution of the Union. This time, the reporters stopped taking photos and started whispering to each other. Chairman Zhang continued, Fantasy's executive director Sehun promised two things, a clear separation between ownership and business, and he promised to do his best to normalize Achimoto without firing anyone. He also gave a clear answer that they would not hesitate to invest if necessary. Sehun was no longer angry but just sat quietly and listened to Chairman speak. Then Chairman Song added, I will say two more things here. Businesses are not conglomerates that only pursue profits. They are workplaces that sustain people's lives. Dahyun Group will fire more than half of the people involved in Akin. Chairman Song affirmed, in the name of restructuring. Do-won listened outside and widened his eyes, because this was a message that was absolutely necessary. Chairman Song continued, in addition, if Dahyun buys Achimoto, they will control nearly 70% of the domestic car market. If a monopoly business only pursues profits, then the choices of the people will disappear. At this point, some reporters started to sway. They followed the wind and said to each other. They did not blur the nature and character of being in sync with things from Japan. Akin Group had invested a lot of public money. Chairman Song continued, The revival as a national enterprise, the separation between management and ownership, and the nurturing of large conglomerates with public money, that is the essence that needs to be considered. At this point, loud and enthusiastic applause sounded, making Cho Duchin smile smugly. Chairman Song's message was fully conveyed, but the timing was indeed an issue. This meeting should have been held a day earlier, when the handover was planned according to the schedule. The focus was not to give Cho De-hyun time to counterattack, because it was too hasty. So when they took out the hidden card first, De-hyun could calmly consider each thing and fight back. The global car market had started a scale trip, where only the top 10 global cars existed. The sales structure of De-hyun cars had long exceeded domestic demand by exports. If Achin and De-hyun became one family, they would have competitive power that could be broken by common design, unified procurement of components and integration of the sales network. Consumers could naturally buy cars at lower prices. Of course, restructuring was inevitable at least, but there could be no workers without a company. He hoped everyone would look further ahead and expect to create huge jobs. Until De-hyun Car Company had international competitiveness and entered the top 10 global. After watching this news, Do-jun turned off the TV. But the TV at home looked a bit shabby lately. Do-jun sighed a bit and was no longer as smug as before. Si-hoon also fell into a very tense state. Do-jun asked how the stock price was. His uncle answered that Do-jun's stock price did not change. Do-jun said that the effect was insignificant afterwards. Si-hoon explained that it was because of the collision of two forces vs. Those who thought that buying Achimoto was a bad thing and those who thought it was a good thing were almost 50:50. Do-jun thought to himself that in the end it was not the result of both forces accepting the transfer of a kin group over here. Si-hoon sighed terribly. It was really scary. He said he was an advertiser, but how could he move the press broadcast as he wanted? Do-jun heard his uncle say that and hesitated for a moment. Do-jun said to Si-hoon, "It's not because I'm afraid of the chaebols, but because the media writes about money. They are not pens that drink alcohol and cameras that swallow love affairs." Si-hoon was amazed to hear the kid preach. What did this kid say? He looked like an old man in society. Do-jun scratched his head and replied, "It's not my words, but my grandfather's. If something unfavorable happens, start blocking from the media." Si-hoon sighed helplessly. De-hyun must have done that too. Do-jun thought to himself. If he had known this, he would not have interfered when his grandfather tried to buy back Achimoto a few years ago. A little later, Do-jun said, "This is the first time in my life that I can't think of anything." Do-jun said, "Uncle, let's forget everything and drink today." Si-hoon was startled. What? Drink? It was the first time this kid invited him to drink, so he was a little shocked. Do-jun asked, "Why? I'm an adult now. Can I drink?" Si-hoon waved his hand and said, "It's not like that. Do you know how to drink? Have you ever drunk before?" he asked. Do-jun remembered his previous life. He didn't drink once or twice until his body was ruined. If he had enough money to drink to solve the daily explosions, he would have a few apartments by now. He laughed out loud when he remembered that scene. Then he got up and said, "Today I have to test my alcohol tolerance a little bit." He took out a black card with power and said, "Let's go drink with this. There is no limit, so choose the most expensive place you know." Si-hoon heard that and was annoyed. What? No limit card? He quickly grabbed the card from his boss's hand. Si-hoon asked, "What is this? Isn't this the card of Hansung Newspaper Company? How do you have this?" Do-jun answered, "My future sister-in-law is the daughter of Hansung Newspaper Company and she gave me pocket money." Hearing about this kid's family, his sister-in-law was also rich and made him stunned. Do-jun continued, "That's the face issue of the third-generation chaebol." He smiled wickedly. If he was determined to spend it, he had to show his sister-in-law how much he could use. Suddenly today he heard this kid talk about spending money like grass and felt a bit poor. Then he digested it and laughed out loud and said like a pervert, "I'll take you to a wonderful place, sir." That night at a luxurious bar with many delicious dishes on the table, Si-hoon was sipping a glass of fine wine by himself. He drank and thought about something. "I think I've figured out the hidden card. I don't know what it is, but looking at the alcohol mixed with beer makes me think of a smart kid who gets ideas from nothing special like this." Later that night at the mansion of Chairman Sun-yen, Do-jun bowed his head and said, "I'm sorry for being late like this, sir." He replied, "It's okay, I haven't slept yet." "But did you drink?" Do-jun answered, "Yes, but I didn't drink much." The chairman asked again, "How do you feel about losing?" But Do-jun calmly said, "I don't think I've lost completely. It's not over until it's over. There's a saying like that." The chairman was annoyed and said, "Where did you get such nonsense? Stop acting foolishly because you can't let go of your regret for things that have ended. It's better to analyze your failure and prepare for the next time. Some people say that men should know when to retreat." Do-jun sat down and replied, "If a Chin motor merges with Daehyun, then Sun-yen motor will also be heavily affected. Aren't you worried, Chairman? That's our business, we can retreat if we need to." At this point, Do-jun realized that retreat? Did he already think of the worst-case scenario? There was no reason for that. It was a business field that was so competitive that people couldn't bear it. If they weren't the first in the industry, they would aim for the second place. But the chairman continued, "More importantly, have you thought about what your mistake was?" Do-jun answered sadly, "I knew that the big conglomerates had a lot of influence, but I couldn't understand that it was just a vague guess." The chairman said, "That's true. You only know how strong the opponent's punch is when you get hit. What else?" Do-jun bowed his head and said, "I was in a hurry to go back, so I missed the right timing." The chairman asked, "What else?" Do-jun said, "I didn't know the meticulousness and detail of Daehyun. I didn't know that they would find out about the whole investment universe in Japan." The chairman asked, "Is that all you learned from this battle?" Do-jun answered, "I didn't know the cruelty that I couldn't do anything about. I couldn't imagine that I would not hesitate to lie and turn the details of the Japanese investment fund into Japan's capital." At this point, the chairman asked, "Can you do everything your husband said?" But Do-jun was still very annoyed. "Isn't it inevitable in the end? We have to be more careful, more ruthless, and be able to lie brazenly without any worries. That's how big businesses are done, right?" The chairman replied, "Do-jun, you must never forget your heart and determination now." Do-jun understood everything he said and replied, "Yes." The chairman smiled comfortably and said, "Now tell me why you came here at this time. You didn't just come here to drink, did you?" Do-jun quickly answered, "As I said, it's not over yet." The chairman was puzzled. "What do you still have?" Do-jun said, "You are holding my last card. I want to get that card." The chairman was surprised and asked again, "What do I have?" Do-jun looked at him and asked, "It's Sun-yen moto. Do you know when they will retreat?" The chairman was shocked and leaned back as if he was sprayed with glue. Do-jun continued, "It's not honey or water to sober up. Mixing honey and water will have a different effect. The merger announcement of the two car companies Chin and Sun-yen will reverse the situation. Do you remember what you told me before about the merger ratio? I want to speed up that process." The chairman frowned every time he heard Do-jun say something. Suddenly he called his nephew seriously. "Do-jun, I boiled water for you because I was proud of you for buying noodles with your own money. You have to finish eating and end it. You can't complain about getting both rice and noodles, right?" Do-jun calmly replied, "The ancients said that we shouldn't regret any grain of rice we put in our mouth. Nephew just wants to eat more noodles. Are you stingy?" The chairman said irritably, "You'll burst your stomach. You're too greedy." Du-jun heard him say that and thought to himself, why is he acting like this now? Didn't he say that I would inherit the shares of Sunyan Group through the merger of the two car companies? He seemed sincere then, without any doubt. Why did his attitude suddenly change? Is he testing me? The more he thought about it, the more annoyed Du-jun became. He clenched his thigh and said to the chairman, "Sir, greed is not a good thing. No matter how big or small it is, you will be criticized for it. So what's the point of being half-hearted? The world's fingers will point at me anyway." After listening to his greedy son-in-law for a while, the chairman began to think. Du-jun thought to himself, I don't need to figure out his intentions. I have to show him how strong my will is, how big my ambition is, and how firm my determination is. After thinking for a while, the chairman asked, "What do you have?" Du-jun was confused by the question. The chairman continued, "The merger is a combination of what you have and what I have. I have Sunyan Moto, but what about you? You don't have a Chin Moto yet." Du-jun said, "The announcement of the merger will be an opportunity to reverse the situation. It's not the same as before, but it's not the same result either. In the end, a Chin Moto will be mine, as you wish." He said confidently, "The merger that we talked about before could be easy. Just recognize the possibility and that's it. You don't think we can cancel it later, do you?" Du-jun answered, "Turning jokes into seriousness and dreams into reality is my job. And negotiation is not a joke. There is no negotiation in the world that cannot be compromised. If the balance is not right, we have to adjust it. We can exchange some conditions for the confirmation announcement. I will put more on the scale." The chairman smiled calmly, "You are so strong now, aren't you? Fine, let's consider it as a pre-merger announcement before verification. As you said." But he added, "There is no guarantee that the situation will be reversed." Du-jun interrupted him, "Not only with the merger announcement, we will have two means of pressure. One is the weight of the name Sunyan Group, which has an advantage over Daehyun Group, right? Now tradition in government, creditors and judges will weigh Sunyan and Daehyun, not fantasy." "What's the other one?" the chairman asked Du-jun. Du-jun calmly answered, "It's the security wrapped by balance and fairness." "Sir," he said firmly, "the unhealthy image of fantasy investment company will disappear like that. Washed away." The chairman stopped talking and seemed to have some problem in his mind. He looked at his precious son-in-law who had a lot of money and then said, "The balance is not right." Du-jun replied quickly, "We can adjust the merger ratio to make it right." But the chairman still smiled like a superior, "Too bad. I don't feel like it's enough." Du-jun was surprised and said to himself, "He still won't agree after all this? I'm angry with myself." I gritted my teeth and said, "I'm greedy for your sake. I'm not even worthy of your shoes. Could it be, he really doesn't intend to give me Sunyan Moto? Or is the test still not over?" Du-jun continued, "I have acquired 10% of all shares of subsidiaries that Sunyan Moto owns. Just by placing a moto like that, I will be heavier." The old man was shocked. "Are you saying that we should split Sunyan Moto?" Du-jun answered, 8 subsidiaries including a Chin Moto and Sunyan Moto. We have another bigger car company." They were really shaken by what Du-jun said. What was Du-jun observing? His expression looked at me with more longing and desire. He had to find out what it was. Only then could this negotiation end successfully. Du-jun secretly thought of an unrealistic reason. Then he raised his eyebrows and continued, "Isn't it too hasty to announce that Sunyan Motor will split completely and merge with a Chi Moto? If that happens, the stock price of Sunyan Motor will drop sharply. Just by announcing the branch separation." The chairman was very surprised and did not expect this kid to think of this idea. Du-jun continued, "When the stock price hits bottom, I will buy it under a different name. The chairman was eager and impatient to hear the next outcome. Du-jun calmly said, after taking over and merging with Achimoto, for various reasons, the division of subsidiaries will be considered as never happened. Everything will strengthen the dominance of Sunyen Group. It is possible to merge the entire Sunyen Group and Achimoto Group. The chairman started to sweat. Then there must be many investors who are avoiding it, right? Du-jun was still calm. A big carriage was moving, and there were ants running on the wheels. We can't avoid them one by one. The chairman asked, for example, the shares of Sunyen Moto that you bought, will you also become one of the major shareholders of Sunyen? Du-jun smiled and replied, that's not an easy gift, sir. If the stock price goes up, you will make money and don't have to pay taxes. The chairman smiled very happily after hearing this. This guy is really gutsy. He became a bad guy when he was young. Du-jun panicked because he didn't know what he meant by that. After a second of thinking, he calmed down and smiled. He succeeded. Then the chairman told his subordinates, I intend to buy a kin group. The two subordinates were very surprised and couldn't believe their ears. They both looked at the chairman with the eyes of this old man is crazy. The secretary thought to himself, I knew something important happened, but I didn't expect it to be this when he called me in the middle of the night. He immediately said, Chairman, Achimoto has already leaned towards Daehyun. We don't have time to prepare now, and we don't have money either. Another one chimed in, moreover, if we jump in while the battle is almost over, it's too late. The chairman calmly said, we will just step in a little bit. That foot is, then he called the secretary's name. It scared him. The two subordinates looked at each other in confusion and didn't understand why the chairman said that. The chairman continued, if Fantasy buys the group, Achimoto will merge with Sunyen Motor. That's what you need to do. In our group, only Sunyen Motor can be taken out and combined with Achimoto. The two car companies will have a new start and the CEO of that car company is Zhu Che-ho. At this time, the one standing next to him couldn't help but say, Chairman, even if we do anything to adjust the merger ratio of the two companies, the largest shareholder will still be Fantasy. The chairman said, Sehun of Fantasy has backed off because if he continues like this, he will become a dog chasing chickens. We will create a new car company and transfer it to our Sunyen. What I mean is to wrap it up nicely. At this time, the secretary asked further, what about Fantasy? The chairman replied, anyway, they are just speculators, so they decided to take care of the expensive wrapping paper. We will find out the position of the chairman, but don't worry about that. So, Zhu Chun-ho, please prepare to go. The next day, on a beautiful day at Sehun's building, Sehun asked, finally, isn't he the one who will leave Sunyen Moto to his grandson? Du-jun answered, no, sir, it's still not certain. He is not that easygoing. Sehun said again, why leave the motorcycle out and get involved with Achimoto, then it's yours. He also knows that Fantasy is yours. Du-jun still has the merger ratio. But if he doesn't give in at that time, the owner will change. Sehun asked incredulously, what are you talking about again? What do you mean by accepting the merger? Du-jun replied, Uncle, that grandfather is not someone who takes your things and then passes them on to you. But he will take everything and then share a little bit. Sehun didn't know what to say when he heard that the chairman was so cruel. And Du-jun thought that Sehun would never know the true face of his grandfather, who was Chairman Jean. His ambition was more important than blood. If he didn't have such ambition, he wouldn't have been able to establish Sunyen. Sehun asked further, has the merger ratio ended? Just then Du-jun answered, not yet, sir. We will discuss that after we acquire a chin. Then he stood up and said, I will handle that problem myself, so don't worry. After saying this, Du-jun also went to the high window and looked down. He started to calculate a new plan to play with his cunning grandfather. When the target for acquisition was selected and the merger procedure was carried out, it was also the time when the cold winter came. A harsh winter that had never been seen in history. By the time both Sun Hyun and the government had no end and only knew how to walk, he would have no choice but to accept my proposal. Then I will give him a glass of wine and he will have to accept it gratefully. Du Jun secretly calculated that tomorrow he would hold a press conference. Sun Yen Motor would become a completely independent company, separate, and we would merge with Achi Moto to ensure the role of a car manufacturing company. The reporters hurriedly took pictures and recorded every word of the speaker. The chairman's legal subordinates were still sitting and listening. Sehun said, "So I want to tell you that our fantasy is not just speculative capital." He continued, "We will do our best to upgrade the Korean automobile industry to a new level." At this time, there was chaos below. "I have a question. What is the relationship between fantasy and Sun Yen?" Director Zhu Che-ho? Then what about Sun Yen in the future? A noisy scene of chaos was happening. And then another remote control went away. The chairman Hyun was furious. He shouted at his subordinates, "How come no one knows about this? Didn't you install someone to follow Song Hwin Trang and Sehun?" A subordinate stood up and reported, "Until last night, they didn't have any special movements, sir." The chairman got even angrier. "Not seeing anything doesn't mean there is nothing. How many phone calls did it take for them to meet and come to an agreement like this? Even if they met, they must have met more than 10 times already. What are you guys doing?" He was angry and his blood rushed to his head as he spoke. Then he continued, "We didn't know about the surprise attacks until now. Now each of you tell me what we should do to salvage the situation." After he said that, the crowd just looked at each other in silence and didn't dare to say anything. Then the chairman scolded them for being blind. "Now you don't know what to do and you don't say anything?" The subordinates started to look at each other in slow motion and didn't dare to utter a word. Then the chairman ordered, "From now on, we will give everyone 2 hours to find all the possible solutions to reverse the situation. Mobilize all the relatives of the Thong family to start lobbying comprehensively." He shouted angrily like a monster. "Even if you are level 9 bank employees, don't complain but add pressure." That morning at the chairman's mansion, his nephew rushed in and shouted "Dad" loudly. Then he yelled, "This can't be happening." The chairman calmly said, "First sit down and have a drink with me." But the nephew was still furious and said, "How can you throw away the motorcycle company like that? What are you regretting?" The chairman still sat in his place and said, "I don't have any regrets, so I threw away everything I was holding in my heart. I threw it all over there and erased it." The nephew was even more angry and said, "How can you not say a word to me? That was a big issue in arranging the branch of the group, but I had to watch TV to find out. How could you do that?" He screamed, "Is that all you are? Your vice chairman title is just a name, right? That's so shameful." The chairman looked at his son who was fuming. The nephew continued, "Until now, Director Jun Che-ho has brought me all the documents. He personally announced the merger with Sun Yen Motor. Think about how much he smiled after getting your approval." He became more angry and said, "Don't you think I'm a fool?" Then the chairman discovered more and said, "Are you done?" The nephew suddenly got asked by his father what's going on. The chairman continued, "If you have vented your anger and sadness, then you have to move on to the next part." But the nephew still didn't understand anything. The chairman asked, "Is your purpose just to vent your anger?" Hearing the chairman say that, the nephew frowned more and shouted, "You think your son is rude?" The chairman slammed his hand on the table. It must have hurt a lot. The chairman also yelled at his son's face, "Enough, enough, you have to stop this." At this point, he realized that he had misspoken and stood still like a mute husband who didn't dare to yell anymore. Now it was the chairman's turn to scold him for being ashamed of his vice chairman title and what else, a fool. If you are ashamed of your vice chairman title of Sun Yen Group, then quit. The nephew hurriedly called his father. "Father, please calm down. But the chairman still scolded him. The title that you are ashamed of is something that all Koreans would fight like a devil to pick up. The chairman pointed at his son and scolded him. Everything you did was because you were born and are my son. Because it's a lucky title that you got, you don't know its value? At this time, he quickly explained, it's not what you think, sir. But the chairman was still angry and said, what do you mean? You are over 40 years old and you have received the title of vice chairman. But if you were not my son, you would just stand still and let me scold you from then until now. The chairman asked again, do you think you can even touch the position of director? He was stunned and speechless like a plant. He was ashamed because his father hit his sore spot. Then, the father and son slow motion like an Indian movie. A little later, the next day at the corporation, the director was talking to his subordinates, keep an eye on Do-jun. He is playing the role of a messenger between Seoul and our chairman. He also knew about the recent merger from the beginning. The two subordinates heard the instructions but did not understand anything. One of them asked quickly, so, will the air position go to Do-jun? The director glanced at him and thought to himself, it's not certain that it's not like that. The chairman has liked that kid since he was young, but he did not stop him from going to law school. With his achievements, he could definitely be the top student of S University. If he needs a lawyer or a prosecutor, he can just pay for it. But I heard that he did not study properly, and what my father wants is to have a flower to show off and be proud of how smart and good his grandson is. He only expects that much from Do-jun, maybe to make the house brighter. If he wanted him to join the corporation, he would have sent him to the business department already. Hearing that, the subordinate asked, but why did he assign Do-jun to Sehun of Fantasy? He is just a decoration. The director smiled and answered. Because he can be used and also thrown away. He has discovered the talent of that talented kid who can make money with money. Maybe he can take over the financial part of the corporation from insurance to credit cards. He continued, don't worry too much anyway. This war will end as quickly as before in one go. Now just build your reputation step by step without making any mistakes. If you suddenly stand out, it will ruin the plan. Then he asked his two subordinates, is the stock price of Sunyan Motor dropping right now? The subordinate answered hastily, yes, the smart ones have already pulled out. The director instructed, when it hits bottom, buy it back without splitting branches. The subordinate asked why. Clearly they said they would split branches. The director said cunningly, my father is not someone who will throw away what he built with his own hands. If he can regain his old position, the stock price will rise and the corporation's control will increase. He warned them, be prepared and don't make any mistakes at this time. The two subordinates answered quickly, yes sir. The next day at a lavish dinner party, Do-jun was enjoying his luxurious dinner. Sitting opposite him was his rich curly-haired cousin. He asked him about the merger of Sunyan Motor. Did you know about it beforehand? Do-jun wondered how this guy could say such things from his mouth. And he couldn't hide his expression either. At times like this, he had to attack directly. Thinking that, Do-jun agreed. He had known a day before the announcement on TV. Why is that? His annoyed cousin asked. How did you know? Do-jun answered while eating, oh, no, the director in Soul of Fantasy asked me to propose to my grandfather, and he also gave me a detailed plan for the merger. His cousin got angry and slammed the table. Why did he ask you to do that? He just had to meet grandfather directly. But Do-jun replied, brother, the group is watching every move of director Sehun. If director O met grandfather directly, they would know. Do-jun thought that it didn't seem like anything special. But why did this guy know? Or was it not him but someone else who followed him? His cousin frowned and asked, is that all? Do-jun calmly answered, what else? Do I have to say more? At this point, his cousin got even more annoyed. Don't you understand what I mean? I'm asking if you only delivered the documents this time. Du-jun pretended to wipe his mouth and thought. Why did this guy suddenly become so suspicious? He never doubted that his father would become the owner of the group, and he accepted his luck of being born. But maybe it was the daughter of Hansung newspaper who urged him. He didn't know everything about his youth, but Ji Young-chun never married into a media family. His ex-wife was the daughter of director Sun Yen, of very obedient company. Seeing his younger brother thinking for a long time, his cousin shouted, "Don't you want to talk clearly?" Du-jun pretended to be scared. "You scared me. Why did you yell like that?" At this point, his cousin reluctantly sat down. Du-jun saw him sit down and sighed with relief. Then he said, "Actually, there is a secret contract between grandfather and director Si-hoon, but I can't tell anyone." That's also the truth. I can't tell anyone before the official announcement. His cousin heard that and got angry. Anyone? Am I an outsider? Am I a stranger? Du-jun enjoyed looking at him and thought. Should I make him more annoyed? Thinking that, he said, "You are an outsider. Don't you know that Young-chun has no power now?" His cousin heard that and yelled at Du-jun's face. Du-jun still calmly said, "What can I do? The contract with grandfather and director Si-hoon can't be known by anyone. Even uncle or manager Lee Hat-chae don't know. And only those two know. Do you think you have more power than them?" His cousin was already angry and now he felt more irritated. He asked, "Don't you remember what I said?" Du-jun asked back, "Do you mean you want me to be your right hand?" "That's right. It's not an empty promise. Next year, I will move out. If you graduate from college, you will become the executive director and the general manager of business." He continued. "At that time, he will leave me a place next to him." But Du-jun said that Young-chun is not a child anymore. He is not a fool who only believes in the fragile promises of the future. His cousin couldn't believe that this kid dared to talk nonsense like that today. He sat still and opened his eyes wide like Son Goku, looking at his cousin. Du-jun continued, "The merger announcement this time was carried out without even your uncle knowing. Even though he is the vice president of the group." His cousin was angry. "What are you talking about?" Du-jun still continued, "You don't know that the inheritance structure of your uncle is not completed yet. It means that it can be broken at any time if the grandfather changes a little bit." His cousin heard that and shouted angrily, "So what? Is the reason you refuse to be my right-hand man because you want to stick to your grandfather to find an opportunity? You and me, I mean, do you want to compete with my father?" Du-jun calmly replied, "You don't have to frown so much. From my perspective, I'm just observing. Anyway, the youngest is just the youngest. I don't have any affinity with Sun Yen Group, so I don't have any ambition. And to be honest, there is nothing to regret. It seems a bit arrogant, but if I study hard, I will pass the judicial exam in 2 years. I'm very confident, you know I'm very good at studying." His cousin asked, "So what?" Du-jun continued, "Being a prosecutor or a judge or something like that, I can scream and enjoy life, get social treatment without worrying about money. And do you know, my father is very famous in the film industry. Just reach out and the beautiful actresses will come to me. The third-generation prosecutor of a chaebol group, the son of the director of a film company. Is there any girl who will refuse this title?" Du-jun boasted. His cousin heard that and was so angry that he wanted to spit blood, but he couldn't do anything. He asked, "So you're going to kick Jun-young out of the group?" But Du-jun smiled and said, "Who said I'm going to kick him out?" At this time, Du-jun suddenly became serious and continued, "If he was the leader, I might try once, but now Young-chun is not the leader." But his cousin had been ridiculed by this kid for a long time and only sat there angrily. He said, "If I become the leader, maybe I won't let you stay by my side. You know we have many cousins and you never know when the stock of Sun Yang Group will be broken by them." Du-jun heard that and sneered in his heart. Because of his pride, he still dared to threaten me. He replied, I told you there is nothing to regret. Now just keep what my family has and it's enough to make others jealous. He thought that the story should end here. He had scratched his inside and convinced him that he had no ambition near his house. Thinking so, he continued, to be honest, being the youngest in a chaebol family is much more comfortable. My brother Shangjun dropped out of college and went to study at New DOC Art School. He doesn't cling to things he can't do. His cousin was very surprised when he heard him say that, but Dujun calculated in his heart that he just needed to lower his survival seat of distrust and insecurity. Thinking so, he said, you only said one right thing. The eldest uncle, the second uncle, the aunties all have a lot of ambition. It's not easy at all. They won't let Sun Yen Group fall into your hands. His cousin was annoyed and replied, you think I don't know that? Anyway, my father will handle everything. My family is not just sitting and watching. Then, as he was speaking, he seemed to realize something. He looked at Dujun and voiced his suspicion. You don't mean the secret contract you know is related to the inheritance structure, do you? At this point, even his cousin was quite shocked by his own thoughts. Meanwhile, at the chairman's house, the conversation between him and his eldest son was still not over. At this time, the eldest nephew only stood silently as if waiting for his husband in front of his father. He said, Father, you are really outrageous. The chairman heard this and became even more furious. Outrageous? You should look at your own actions like a fool. How can you still talk to me like this now? The chairman said. After saying that, the father looked at his eldest son and then thought for a while. He sighed and calmed down. The chairman continued, Sanki, I understand that you are angry when you learn the truth through TV, but that was to pass through public opinion. So you should think about what will happen in the future, what preparations need to be supplemented and implemented for the real benefits that our group will get from the merger. That is what a vice chairman like you should do, not be angry like this. After saying that, the chairman gently stretched out his old hands behind him. After a moment of anger, he put his hand on his eldest son's shoulder as if to comfort him. Then the chairman said, Sanji, you only need to work 10 minutes with others to get this position. Don't act rashly, just think about the future of the group and use all your strength to develop and protect the group. That is all you have to do. The eldest nephew heard his father say that and could only bow his head and obey. The chairman still stood still, patting his eldest son's shoulder. Then he mocked himself that he was over 47 years old but still had to comfort his grown-up son. A morning at Sun Yen Group was like any other morning. A subordinate was reporting that 2 days ago Dujun had gotten into Sihun's car right after Li Che's manager and Chu Cheho's director had arrived. The speaker showed a picture and continued, Dujun left before those two arrived. The director took the picture and looked at it for a while. In the picture were 3 old men shaking hands with each other. Then he kept staring at the picture as if looking at an ex-lover's photo.